Marcus Chen stared at the dismissal papers in his hands, the alien script dancing before his tired eyes like mocking insects. 3 years aboard the merchant vessel HFY, 3 years of keeping their aging systems running with nothing but scrap metal and stubborn determination. And this was how it ended. "You understand the charges, human Marcus?" Captain Vextai's 4 arms gestured dismissively, his chitinous exoskeleton clicking with each movement. The HFY's insectoid features made reading emotions difficult, but Marcus had learned to recognize contempt in the way the captain's mandibles twitched. "I understand the words," Marcus replied carefully, "but not the logic behind them." The bridge of the HFY hummed with the soft blue glow of alien technology. Most of it outdated by galactic standards, but still functional thanks to Marcus's constant maintenance. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was being fired on a bridge he'd personally rewired 6 months ago when the primary control systems had failed. Chief Engineer Zalthon, a hulking Bruggen with 6 eyes and an unfortunate habit of second-guessing every human decision, stepped forward. His massive frame cast a shadow over Marcus as he spoke in his rumbling bass voice. "The human committed gross negligence by attempting unauthorized repairs on vessels not belonging to our company. Such actions could have resulted in diplomatic incidents or worse." Marcus bit back his first response, counting to 10 in Mandarin before speaking. The ships were drifting. Their life support was failing. There were crew members aboard who would have died if someone hadn't acted. "Not our concern." Vextai clicked his mandibles decisively. "You were ordered to maintain our ship, not play hero to every damaged vessel we encounter. Your unauthorized actions cost this company potential salvage rights and put us at risk of legal action from unknown parties." The human engineer felt his jaw clench. 3 days ago, they'd encountered 2 ships locked in a slow, deadly orbit around a gas giant's moon. Both vessels had been broadcasting distress signals in multiple languages, their crews slowly suffocating as life support systems failed one by one. The HFY's sensors had detected the ships during a routine navigation scan, and Marcus had immediately requested permission to investigate. Permission that had been denied. "Those people would have died," Marcus said quietly. "I couldn't just watch that happen. And that is precisely why humans make poor long-term crew members," Zalthon rumbled. "Too emotional, too impulsive, unable to see the bigger picture." The accusation stung because Marcus knew it wasn't entirely wrong. He had acted on instinct when he'd taken a maintenance pod and crossed to the damaged ships. The crews of both vessels had been on the verge of asphyxiation, their CO2 scrubbers failing and emergency oxygen nearly depleted. Basic emergency repairs had saved 43 lives across both ships. Simple repairs that any competent engineer could have performed in a few hours. "The fact remains," Captain Vextai continued, his voice taking on the formal tone he used for official business, "that you disobeyed direct orders, abandoned your post, and potentially exposed this vessel to legal liability. Your contract is hereby terminated effective immediately. You will be transferred to the nearest station with human diplomatic presence." Marcus looked around the bridge at faces he'd worked alongside for 3 years. Some showed sympathy. Engineers mate Kiravel had actually helped him plan the rescue operation, though she'd wisely kept that information to herself. Others, like Navigation Officer Thexwan, seemed relieved to see the human go. The diversity of reactions reminded Marcus why he'd originally taken the job aboard a multi-species vessel, the chance to prove that humans could integrate successfully into galactic civilization. So much for that dream. "What about my personal effects?" Marcus asked, forcing his voice to remain steady. "Your quarters have been secured," Zalthon replied. "Personal belongings will be returned to you upon transfer. Company equipment will remain aboard this vessel." That meant they were taking his tools, his diagnostic equipment, even the modified scanner he'd built from spare parts to better detect system failures. 3 years of improvements to their operations, gone with a dismissal notice. The Nexus 7 station is 3 days from here, Captain Vextai continued. They have a human consulate. You can arrange transport to Earth or wherever humans are accepting refugees these days. The casual dismissal in that last comment made Marcus's hands curl into fists, but he kept his expression neutral. Getting into a fight would only prove their point about human emotional instability. "I'll be ready to transfer when we arrive," he said simply. As Marcus turned to leave the bridge, he caught sight of the main display showing their current course. They were still in the outer system where they'd encountered the damaged ships, though the vessels themselves were no longer visible on sensors, probably already claimed by salvage crews or picked up by their respective governments. The walk back to his quarters gave Marcus time to think about what had really happened 3 days ago. The official story was simple enough. Disobedient human risks ship and crew to play hero. But there had been something odd about the entire situation that nagged at him. Both ships had been damaged in very specific ways. Not the random destruction you'd expect from pirates or equipment failure, but precise strikes to propulsion and life support. As if someone had wanted to disable them without destroying them completely. The crews had been frightened, certainly, but when Marcus had asked about the attacks, their answers had been vague and contradictory. And then there were the ships themselves. Marcus had worked on dozens of different vessel types during his time in space. Merchant ships, passenger transports, mining barges, research vessels. Each had distinctive design elements that marked them as belonging to specific manufacturers or governments. The 2 ships they'd rescued had looked like standard civilian transports at first glance, but the closer Marcus had gotten, the more details had seemed wrong. The hull plating was too thick for a civilian vessel. The power distribution networks were designed for much higher energy loads than any merchant ship would need. And the crew quarters had been arranged in a pattern that suggested military training and discipline rather than the casual layouts favored by civilian spacers. Military vessels disguised as civilian transports, but military vessels belonging to whom? And why had they been disabled and left to drift in an empty system? Marcus's quarters were small but efficiently organized, a necessity when sharing space with species that had very different ideas about personal territory. His engineering books were neatly arranged on the single shelf, and his clothes were stored in the compact dresser that doubled as a desk chair. 3 years of his life reduced to what could fit in 2 duffel bags. As he began packing, Marcus found himself thinking about the rescued crews, 43 people who would have died if he hadn't intervened. The Keth-Dai captain might not value those lives, but Marcus did. Human emotional instability, Zalthon had called it. Maybe so, but it was also what made humans willing to risk everything for strangers. A soft chime indicated someone requesting entry. Marcus opened the door to find Kira Vell standing in the corridor, her reptilian features showing clear signs of distress. The Saurian engineer had been his closest friend aboard the ship, and one of the few crew members who seemed to genuinely appreciate human creativity and problem-solving abilities. "May I enter?" she asked formally. With security systems recording all interactions, she couldn't afford to appear too friendly with the dismissed human. "Of course," Marcus stepped aside to let her in. Kira Vell's scaled skin had taken on the reddish hue that indicated strong emotion in her species. She looked around the half-packed quarters for a moment before speaking. "I wanted to apologize for what happened on the bridge. Your actions saved lives. That should count for something." "But not enough to keep my job," Marcus replied without bitterness. "I knew the risks when I made the choice." "Did you?" Kira Vell fixed him with her large golden eyes. "Because I've been thinking about those ships you rescued, and something doesn't add up." Marcus paused in his packing. "What do you mean?" The Saurian engineer glanced toward the door, then activated a small device that would mask their conversation from the ship's monitoring systems. "I ran the sensor logs through my personal analysis software. Those ships weren't what they appeared to be." I noticed some oddities in the design, Marcus admitted. Military-grade components in civilian hulls. More than that, Kiravel's tail lashed nervously. I managed to get partial scans of their computer cores before we left the area. The registration numbers were fake, Marcus. Both ships were listed as destroyed in combat actions over 2 years ago. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Ghost ships? Worse. According to the database, those vessels belong to the Hegemony's Black Ops division. Deep reconnaissance ships designed to look like civilian transports while gathering intelligence in neutral space. The Hegemony. The aggressive alliance of insectoid and arthropod species that had been expanding their territory for the past decade, absorbing smaller civilizations through a combination of economic pressure and military intimidation. They were technically at peace with the Galactic Trade Federation, but everyone knew it was a fragile peace that could shatter at any moment. If that's true, Marcus said slowly, then someone attacked Hegemony intelligence assets and left them to die. That's an act of war. Or it would be, if anyone could prove the Hegemony was operating spy ships in neutral space. Kiravel's golden eyes gleamed. But now those ships have been rescued and repaired by a human engineer who just happened to be in the right place at the right time. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. He hadn't just saved 43 lives, he'd potentially prevented a galactic incident. If the Hegemony ships had been found dead with their crews, the blame could have fallen on any number of species or governments. Instead, they'd been rescued and could return to wherever spy ships went when their missions were complete. Does Captain Vextai know about this? Marcus asked. I don't think so. And I'm not sure he'd care if he did. The captain sees everything in terms of profit and loss. Preventing a war doesn't show up in the company's quarterly reports. Marcus resumed his packing, but his mind was racing. If Kiravel was right about the ships, then his dismissal took on an entirely different character. He wasn't being fired for disobedience, he was being fired for preventing a potential interstellar war that someone might have wanted to start. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Kiravel was quiet for a long moment. Because I've worked with humans before you came aboard. I've seen what your species can accomplish when you're properly motivated, and I think you deserve to know that your so-called reckless behavior might have saved more lives than just those 43 crew members. She moved toward the door, then paused. There's something else you should know. The company is planning to put out a notice about your dismissal, warning other employers about your unreliable behavior. They want to make sure no other shipping line will hire you. The casual cruelty of it stunned Marcus. Not only were they firing him, they were planning to destroy his career across the entire galactic shipping industry, all for saving lives and possibly preventing a war. Why would they go that far? He asked. Because someone wants you silenced, Kiravel replied grimly. Someone with enough influence to pressure a trading company into destroying a human engineer's career. The question is who and what they're trying to hide. After she left, Marcus sat on his narrow bunk and stared at the half-packed bags. 3 days until they reached Nexus 7. 3 days to figure out what was really happening and why his career was being sacrificed to cover it up. The rescued ships had been Hegemony intelligence assets. Someone had disabled them and left them to die. And now someone else was making sure the human who'd saved them would never work in space again. But there was one thing his would-be silencers hadn't counted on. Marcus Chen was a human engineer, and humans were notoriously bad at knowing when to quit. He reached for his personal tablet and began making notes. If someone wanted him gone badly enough to destroy his career, then maybe what he'd stumbled onto was bigger than just 2 disabled spy ships. Maybe those 43 lives he'd saved were connected to something much larger and more dangerous. The next 3 days were going to be very interesting indeed. Marcus spent the first night after his dismissal lying awake in his bunk, staring at the ceiling and thinking about ghost ships and galactic conspiracies. When sleep finally came, it was filled with dreams of burning spacecraft and the faces of 43 people he'd never see again. The next morning brought routine aboard the HFY, though Marcus was now excluded from the daily engineering briefings. Instead, he found himself with something he hadn't had in years: time to think without constant system alerts and maintenance schedules demanding his attention. He used that time to dig deeper into the mystery Kiravel had revealed. His personal tablet wasn't connected to the ship's main computer network, but it did have access to the general Galactic Information Database through the communications array. Marcus began researching everything he could find about the two ships he'd rescued, starting with their fake registration numbers and working backwards. The process was slow and methodical, requiring careful cross-referencing of shipping manifests, insurance records, and military casualty reports. But Marcus had learned patience during his years maintaining alien technology, and humans had a particular talent for finding patterns in seemingly unrelated data. The first breakthrough came when he found the original destruction reports for both vessels. According to official Hegemony military records, the ships had been lost during a training exercise in Hegemony space 26 months ago. All hands presumed dead, vessels completely destroyed, case closed. Except the ships had very clearly not been destroyed. They'd been repaired and converted into intelligence assets, then sent into neutral space on some kind of covert mission. Marcus dug deeper into the training exercise that had supposedly destroyed the ships. The official report was sparse on details, but cross-referencing with other military documents revealed something interesting. The exercise had taken place in the same system where the Hegemony had discovered rich mineral deposits 6 months later. Deposits that had subsequently been used to justify expanding their territorial claims. A pattern began to emerge. Ships would be reported destroyed during training exercises, then mysteriously reappear months or years later in areas where the Hegemony had strategic interests. Always in neutral space, always with civilian markings, always gathering intelligence that would later justify territorial expansion. But someone had been hunting these ghost ships. Marcus found records of 17 similar vessels that had been reported destroyed in Hegemony training exercises over the past 3 years. Of those 17, 5 had been found disabled or destroyed in neutral space under suspicious circumstances. The crews of 3 ships had been rescued by passing vessels, while 2 had been found dead, their ships stripped of all useful technology. The human engineer leaned back in his chair, processing the implications. Someone was systematically hunting Hegemony intelligence assets, disabling them just enough to strand their crews, then leaving them to die. If not for the intervention of rescue ships like the HFY, dozens of intelligence operatives would have died slow deaths in disabled spacecraft. But who had the capability and motivation to hunt Hegemony spy ships? Marcus was pondering this question when his door chimed again. This time it was engineer's mate Threndak, a young HFY who'd joined the crew only 6 months ago. Unlike most of his species, Threndak seemed genuinely interested in human engineering techniques and had often sought Marcus out for technical discussions. "May I enter, human Marcus?" the young alien asked formally. "Of course, Threndak. What can I do for you?" The HFY entered nervously, his mandibles clicking in the pattern that indicated anxiety among his people. "I wish to express regret about your dismissal. Your teaching has been valuable to my development." Marcus smiled at the formal phrasing. Threndak had always been careful with his language, as if afraid of saying something wrong. "Thank you. That means a lot to me." "I have brought you something," Threndak said, producing a small data chip from his tool pouch. "Information that may be of interest." Marcus accepted the chip carefully. "What kind of information?" "Communications logs from the ships you rescued. I was assigned to monitor their transmissions during the rescue operation, but I was instructed to delete the recordings after we departed the system. However, I had already created a backup for my personal reference." The human engineer felt his pulse quicken. "Did anyone else know about this backup?" "No. I created it without authorization because I wished to study human communication patterns. Your species has such interesting variations in language usage during stress situations." Marcus almost smiled at that. Even in the middle of a conspiracy, academic curiosity found a way to provide useful intelligence. "Thank you, Threndak. This could be very helpful." After the young Kethdi left, Marcus inserted the data chip into his tablet and began reviewing the communications logs. Most of the transmissions were standard distress calls and emergency coordination between the two ships, but buried in the routine chatter, he found something that made his blood run cold. The crews of both ships had been discussing their mission in the hours before the attack that disabled them. They'd been investigating reports of unusual ship movements in the sector, specifically merchant vessels that appeared to be carrying military-grade sensor arrays while maintaining civilian registrations. Ships exactly like the HFY. Marcus reviewed the ship's registration and cargo manifest with new eyes. The HFY was listed as a standard merchant transport, but Marcus knew better than anyone what modifications had been made to its systems over the years. The sensor arrays he'd helped upgrade were far more sophisticated than any civilian vessel needed. The communication equipment could intercept and decode military transmissions. Even the cargo holds had been modified with hidden compartments that could conceal almost anything. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The HFY wasn't just a merchant ship. It was a covert operations vessel, possibly working for the same organization that had been hunting hegemony spy ships. And he'd been their engineer for 3 years, unknowingly maintaining the very systems used for intelligence operations. Marcus immediately began reviewing every modification he'd made to the ship's systems, looking for patterns he'd missed. The upgraded sensors weren't just more sensitive, they were configured to detect the specific energy signatures used by hegemony propulsion systems. The communication array could not only intercept military transmissions, but also jam them selectively. Even the maintenance pods he'd used to reach the disabled ships had been modified with equipment that could disable enemy vessels without destroying them. Everything he'd been asked to build, every upgrade he'd been ordered to install, had been designed for covert military operations. But operations for whom? Marcus spent the next several hours reviewing shipping records and crew assignments for the HFY. The ship's ownership was buried behind layers of shell companies and legal entities, but patient detective work eventually led him to a surprising conclusion. The HFY was owned by the Galactic Trade Federation's Intelligence Division, the same organization that was supposedly at peace with the hegemony while secretly hunting their spy ships and stranding their crews to die in disabled vessels. Marcus sat back in his chair, trying to process the full implications of what he'd discovered. The Federation wasn't just gathering intelligence on the hegemony. They were actively sabotaging hegemony operations while maintaining plausible deniability. And when one of those operations had gone wrong and required human intervention to prevent a diplomatic incident, they'd decided to silence the engineer who knew too much. But there was still one piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. If the Federation wanted to keep their operations secret, why dismiss him so publicly? Why risk drawing attention to the incident instead of simply transferring him to another assignment? The answer came to him as he was reviewing the timeline of events once more. His dismissal wasn't meant to silence him. It was meant to discredit him. By painting him as an unreliable, emotionally unstable human who couldn't follow orders, they were ensuring that anything he might say about the incident would be dismissed as the ramblings of a disgraced engineer, and the notice they planned to send to other shipping companies would make sure he couldn't find work anywhere in the galaxy where he might encounter similar operations and piece together the broader pattern. Marcus was still processing this revelation when his door chimed for the 3rd time that day. This time it was Kiravel, and her expression was grim. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. Privately. Marcus activated his privacy device, and Kiravel immediately began speaking in urgent, hushed tones. "I've been monitoring ship communications," she said. "There's a Federation intelligence ship waiting for us at Nexus 7. They're planning to take you into custody for debriefing as soon as we arrive." "Let me guess," Marcus replied. "The kind of debriefing people don't come back from." "I think so, yes." "Marcus, I've been reviewing the ship's mission logs for the past 3 years. We haven't just been hunting hegemony spy ships, we've been hunting anyone who might threaten Federation expansion plans. Merchants who discover too much about classified operations, journalists who ask the wrong questions, engineers who stumble onto things they shouldn't know about." The pieces were falling into place now. The Federation wasn't just defending against hegemony expansion. They were clearing the way for their own territorial ambitions. And the Kethvar was one of many vessels tasked with eliminating inconvenient witnesses while maintaining the Federation's reputation as a peaceful trading alliance. "How many people do you think they've killed?" Marcus asked quietly. "I don't know. But I know they're planning to add you to the list in 2 days when we reach Nexus 7. Marcus nodded grimly. He'd suspected as much once he'd realized the scope of the conspiracy, but hearing it confirmed still sent a chill down his spine. "There's something else," Kiravel continued. "I've been in contact with a group of independent traders who've been investigating Federation intelligence operations. They call themselves the Free Traders Alliance, and they're working to expose what the Federation has been doing. Whistleblowers. More than that, they're trying to prevent a war between the Federation and the hegemony. Both sides have been committing covert operations against each other, building toward a conflict that could destroy half the galaxy. The Alliance believes the only way to prevent that is to expose the truth about what both governments have been doing." Marcus thought about the 43 lives he'd saved, and the millions more that could be lost if the galaxy's 2 largest powers went to war with each other. "What do they want from me?" "Evidence. Proof of Federation intelligence operations that can't be dismissed or covered up. You've been maintaining their equipment for 3 years. You know their capabilities better than anyone except their own engineers. And if I provide that evidence? The Alliance has resources. They can get you safely out of Federation space and provide you with a new identity. You could disappear completely, start over somewhere the Federation can't reach you." Marcus considered the offer. It was tempting. The chance to escape and build a new life away from the conspiracy he'd stumbled into. But it would also mean abandoning everything he'd worked for, admitting defeat in his dream of proving that humans could contribute meaningfully to galactic civilization. "There's another option," he said slowly. "What if instead of just providing evidence, I helped them gather it directly?" Kiravel's golden eyes widened. "You want to go undercover? I want to make sure the evidence is so overwhelming that the Federation can't cover it up or discredit it, and I want to save as many lives as possible before this war starts." The Saurian engineer was quiet for a long moment. "It would be incredibly dangerous. If they caught you, there wouldn't be any rescue this time. But if we succeed, we could prevent a galactic war and save millions of lives. That seems worth the risk." Kiravel nodded slowly. "I'll contact the Alliance and tell them you're interested. But Marcus, there's something you need to understand. Once you commit to this path, there's no going back. You'll be fighting against one of the most powerful intelligence organizations in the galaxy, with resources and connections you can't imagine." Marcus thought about the 43 crew members he'd rescued, the millions who would die if war broke out, and the principles that had led him to become an engineer in the first place. Humans built things, fixed things, made things better. Sometimes that meant repairing broken machines, and sometimes it meant repairing broken systems. "I understand the risks," he said, "but someone has to do it. And it might as well be a stubborn human engineer who's already been dismissed for being too emotional and impulsive." Kiravel smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her since his dismissal. In that case, we have a lot of planning to do, and very little time to do it. The Alliance ship will rendezvous with us in 18 hours, before we reach Nexus 7. If you're going to disappear, it has to be then. Marcus nodded and began gathering his few remaining possessions. In 18 hours, he would either be dead or he would be beginning the most important mission of his life. Either way, the galaxy was about to discover that dismissing a human engineer for being too emotional and impulsive was a mistake that could cost them everything. The Alliance ship Wanderer's Dream was nothing like the sleek vessels Marcus had grown accustomed to during his years in space. Built from salvaged components and held together by determination and improvisation, it looked more like a flying junkyard than a starship. But as Marcus watched it approach through the HFY's sensor feeds, he couldn't help but admire the elegant efficiency of its jury-rigged systems. "Beautiful, isn't she?" Kiravel said softly as they watched the transfer pod dock with their ship's cargo bay. "The Alliance doesn't have the resources for new ships, so they make do with whatever they can find." Marcus nodded, understanding immediately. It was the same philosophy that had guided his work aboard the HFY. Make everything work better with whatever materials you have available. The difference was that the Alliance was doing it to save lives, not to enable covert military operations. The transfer had to be carefully timed. Marcus would board a cargo pod supposedly destined for the ship's waste processing system, but which would actually be picked up by the Wanderer's Dream before it was jettisoned. The official records would show that the pod had been destroyed in a routine waste disposal operation, giving him the cover he needed to disappear completely. "Are you certain about this?" Kiravel asked as they made their way to the cargo bay. "Once you're aboard that ship, there's no returning to your old life." "My old life ended when I got dismissed for saving people," Marcus replied. "Whatever comes next has to be better than pretending none of this happened." The cargo pod was cramped and uncomfortable, designed for transporting materials rather than passengers. Marcus squeezed inside with his 2 duffel bags and the data storage device containing everything he'd learned about Federation intelligence operations. As the pod sealed and began its journey toward the supposed waste disposal system, he reflected on how much his life had changed in just 3 days. 3 days ago, he'd been a starship engineer with a promising career ahead of him. Now he was a fugitive from one of the galaxy's most powerful intelligence organizations, carrying information that could prevent or start an interstellar war depending on how it was used. The pod shuddered as it was captured by the Wanderer's Dream's retrieval system, and a few minutes later, Marcus found himself climbing out into the most chaotic engineering space he'd ever seen. Cables ran along every surface, jury-rigged control panels were mounted wherever they would fit, and the air hummed with the sound of dozens of different systems working in careful harmony. "Welcome aboard the Dream," said a voice behind him. Marcus turned to see a tall, thin woman with the pale skin and enhanced eyes that marked her as a void-born human, someone who'd spent her entire life in space. "I'm Captain Sarah Chen. No relation, I assume?" "None that I know of," Marcus replied, accepting her offered handshake. "Thank you for the rescue." "Don't thank me yet. What we're asking you to do makes rescuing you look easy." She gestured for him to follow her through the maze of engineering equipment. "Kiravel filled us in on what you discovered aboard the HFY. If you're right about the scope of Federation intelligence operations, we're looking at the largest covert war in galactic history." They made their way to the ship's main computer core, which looked like it had been assembled from components belonging to at least 6 different species. Captain Chen activated a holographic display showing star charts and shipping routes across Federation and hegemony space. "Over the past 2 years, we've documented 47 incidents of merchant ships disappearing or being found disabled in neutral space," she explained. "At first, we thought it was just pirates or mechanical failures, but your information suggests something much more systematic." Marcus studied the display. noting the patterns in the incident locations. They're all along major trade routes between Federation and hegemony space, perfect places for intelligence gathering. Exactly. Both sides have been running covert operations against each other, but they've been very careful to make it look like random piracy or mechanical failures. Until now. What's changed? Captain Chen manipulated the display to show recent intelligence reports. 3 weeks ago, a hegemony battle group accidentally strayed into Federation space during training exercises. 2 days later, a Federation patrol discovered what they claimed was evidence of hegemony weapons smuggling to rebel groups in neutral systems. Each side is looking for an excuse to start open hostilities. Marcus felt a chill as he realized the implications. The ships I rescued, they were meant to be found dead, weren't they? We think so. 43 dead hegemony intelligence operatives found in neutral space would have been the perfect excuse for the hegemony to launch retaliatory strikes against Federation shipping. Your rescue operation prevented what could have been the opening shots of a galactic war. But now they need another provocation. And they're planning to create one in 5 days during the Galactic Trade Summit on Nexus 7. Representatives from both the Federation and the hegemony will be there, along with delegations from 30 smaller governments. If something happens during the summit, Marcus understood immediately. An attack during the summit would be blamed on the other side, giving whoever was really responsible the excuse they needed to start a war that would consume half the galaxy. What kind of attack are they planning? Captain Chen's expression grew grim. That's what we need your help to find out. Your knowledge of Federation intelligence equipment gives us the best chance of penetrating their security and learning their plans. Over the next 4 days, Marcus worked with the Alliance technical team to prepare for what they were calling Operation Sunlight, an attempt to expose the covert war and prevent the planned provocation at the summit. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. They would use Marcus's knowledge of Federation systems to hack into their communication networks and broadcast evidence of the covert operations to every major news outlet in the galaxy simultaneously. The technical challenges were enormous. Federation intelligence used quantum-encrypted communications that changed their security protocols every few hours. Their computer systems were protected by AI sentinels that could detect and eliminate intrusion attempts in microseconds, and all of their most sensitive data was stored in isolation chambers that were physically separated from any external networks. But Marcus had spent 3 years maintaining the very systems they needed to penetrate, and humans had a particular talent for finding creative solutions to impossible problems. The key is the maintenance protocols, he explained to the Alliance team as they reviewed the technical specifications. Every Federation intelligence ship has to download routine updates for their systems, and those downloads are authenticated using maintenance codes that I helped design. You can fake the authentication? Asked Zira, a brilliant Saurian programmer who'd been working on communication intercepts. Better than that. I can use legitimate maintenance codes to install our own monitoring software directly into their systems. Once it's in place, we'll have access to everything: communications, operational plans, even the locations of their covert assets. The plan required precise timing and flawless execution. The Alliance had identified 12 Federation intelligence ships that would be in position to coordinate the attack during the summit. Marcus would need to penetrate the computer systems of each ship simultaneously, installing monitoring software that could gather evidence while remaining undetected. As the Wanderer's dream approached Nexus 7, Marcus made his final preparations. The data storage device he'd brought from the Kethvar contained not just evidence of past operations, but detailed schematics of Federation intelligence equipment. Combined with the maintenance codes he'd memorized during his years as an engineer, it gave him everything he needed to penetrate the most secure computer systems in the galaxy. The attack began exactly as the Alliance had predicted. During the opening ceremony of the Trade Summit, a series of explosions rocked the station's commercial sector. The blasts were carefully designed to look like sabotage while minimizing actual casualties, but they provided the perfect excuse for Federation security forces to implement emergency protocols. As Marcus watched the news feeds from his position aboard the Wanderer's Dream, he saw Federation and hegemony representatives accusing each other of orchestrating the attacks. Within hours, both sides were mobilizing their fleets and preparing for what looked like inevitable war. But Marcus was ready. Using the chaos of the emergency response as cover, he began his penetration of the Federation intelligence network. The maintenance codes he'd designed years ago still worked, allowing him to access system after system without triggering security alerts. As he gathered evidence of the covert operations, a picture emerged that was even worse than he'd imagined. The Federation hadn't just been hunting hegemony spy ships, they'd been orchestrating a campaign of false flag operations designed to make the hegemony look aggressive and expansionist. Merchant ships had been attacked by Federation forces disguised as hegemony raiders. Trade disputes had been artificially created by sabotaging hegemony cargo shipments. Even terrorist attacks in neutral space had been carried out by Federation Black Ops teams using stolen hegemony equipment. But the hegemony hadn't been innocent either. Marcus found evidence of their own false flag operations, including the training exercises that had been used to justify territorial expansion. Both sides had been manipulating galactic opinion for years, building toward a war that would let them divide the galaxy between them. The most damning evidence came from the operational plans for the summit attack. The explosions had been carried out by a joint Federation hegemony Black Ops team, with both sides planning to blame the other while secretly coordinating their response. The war they were about to fight would be carefully managed to eliminate smaller governments and independent traders, leaving only the two major powers in control of galactic commerce. As Marcus compiled the evidence, he realized that his dismissal from the HFY had been part of the plan all along. They'd needed someone to rescue the hegemony spy ships to prevent a premature war, but they couldn't risk him discovering the truth about the operation. His emotional instability had made him the perfect, unwitting tool, someone who could be counted on to save lives while remaining ignorant of the larger conspiracy. Except Marcus hadn't remained ignorant, and now he had the power to expose everything. The broadcast began simultaneously on over 300 different communication channels, reaching every major news outlet, government, and independent trader in the galaxy. Marcus had designed the transmission to be impossible to jam or block, using the same techniques he'd developed for Federation intelligence operations. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Audio recordings of planning sessions, video feeds of false flag operations, detailed financial records showing how the war had been funded. Everything the galaxy needed to understand what had really been happening. The reaction was swift and decisive. Within hours of the broadcast, both Federation and hegemony fleets were standing down as their respective governments faced massive protests and calls for investigation. The carefully planned war collapsed as independent governments and traders refused to participate in what they now knew was an elaborate deception. But the most satisfying moment for Marcus came when he received a message from Captain Vextai aboard the HFY. The HFY captain, who had dismissed him for being too emotional and impulsive, was now facing charges for his role in Federation intelligence operations. "I wanted to inform you," the message said, "that I have reviewed the evidence you provided, and I now understand the true nature of your actions during the rescue operation. Your emotional instability, as I termed it, was in fact exactly the kind of moral clarity that the galaxy needed. I formally apologize for my error in judgment." Marcus smiled as he read the message. It had taken a galaxy-wide conspiracy and the threat of interstellar war, but someone had finally admitted that human emotional instability might actually be a good thing. The Alliance offered him a permanent position as their chief technical officer, but Marcus had other plans. The galaxy had just learned that its two largest powers had been manipulating everyone for years, and there would be enormous demand for independent engineers who could be trusted to maintain ships and systems without hidden agendas. More importantly, there would be opportunities to work with humans who were being recruited to help rebuild galactic civilization on more honest foundations. The stereotype of humans as too emotional and impulsive was being replaced by a new understanding. Humans were willing to risk everything to do what was right, even when it was difficult or dangerous. 6 months later, Marcus found himself aboard a new ship, the New Dawn, the first vessel built by a cooperative of species working together as equals, rather than in the hierarchical structures favored by the Federation and hegemony. As chief engineer, he was responsible for maintaining systems designed by dozens of different species, all working together to create something better than what had come before. As he made his rounds through the engineering sections, checking on the various systems that kept the ship running, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since his dismissal from the HFY. He'd been fired for saving 43 lives, but those lives had been the key to saving millions more. His reckless behavior had prevented a galactic war. His emotional instability had exposed a conspiracy that could have destroyed civilization itself. The galaxy was still learning to work together, and there were still those who saw humans as unpredictable and dangerous. But there were also those who understood that sometimes the galaxy needed people who were willing to break the rules to do what was right. And sometimes the dismissed engineer who couldn't follow orders was exactly what the universe needed. Marcus smiled as he completed his inspection rounds and headed back to his quarters. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to prove that humans belonged among the stars. But tonight, he could rest knowing that 43 lives had become millions saved, and that being dismissed for fixing 2 ships had led to fixing something much larger and more important: the galaxy itself.